They left me behind on Thanksgiving, in my own home, with a stranger I barely knew. But what they didn't expect was that the two of us would become the lesson they'd never forget. Upon entering Maple Street, I should have sensed that something was up, I guess. There was noticeably no sign of Mrs. Henderson's tabby cat, who usually sprawled across my front porch as if he owned the area. No one could be seen in the row of cars that normally lines my driveway for our yearly Thanksgiving get-together. The November evening made even the porch light, which I never turned off when guests were around, seem dim. My customary keen instincts had been blunted by the weariness of my 3-day meditation retreat. I told my son Robert that I would be home by 4 o'clock on Thanksgiving Day when I reluctantly accepted Sister Catherine's invitation to the silent retreat at St. Mary's Retreat Center. More than enough time to get everything ready for the 6 o'clock family supper. Since everyone was coming in at the same time from the airport, he had told me that the home would be unoccupied till then. At the last second. I had assumed as much. I was pleased to see that being on time was still one of my stronger characteristics at the age of 72 when I pulled into my driveway at 3:55 p.m. The peaceful neighborhood exemplified all that I cherished about late autumn New England, with its lawns littered with fallen leaves and the way smoke curled from nearby chimneys. Robert and Bethany kept nagging me to downsize, but I had no intention of leaving this colonial house where I had lived for 43 years and where I had reared my son. Just because I turned another year older doesn't mean I can't still teach piano lessons in the same 4-bedroom house I have for the past 40 years. While mentally going over the remaining supper preparations, I retrieved my little overnight bag from the passenger seat and ascended the familiar flagstone walk. Everything needed to be done to get the turkey ready to roast. It had been 2 days since the cranberry sauce was created. Pumpkin and pecan pies languished in the deep freeze. After decades of rehearsal, I had the final execution down to a precise choreography. I couldn't help but smile as my key glided into the lock, encountering that comforting resistance right before the tumbler snapped. Back at home. There was no substitute for getting back to one's own environment, even though the retreat was peaceful. "Hello?" As I entered the room, I instinctively yelled out, even though I didn't anticipate anyone answering. A dim glow emanated from the living room into the entryway, which was otherwise in the dark. I was sure I had turned off all the lights before leaving, so I scowled. I dropped my backpack and lunged for the wall switch. "In your shoes, I wouldn't do it." Suddenly, out of the darkness of my living room, a raspy voice emerged. My aging eyes aren't as good at adjusting to light as they once were. In an instant, my pulse began pumping at a staccato rate that would have astounded even my most accomplished piano students. In my beloved rocking rocker, a frail guy with a shock of white hair and crooked hands neatly wrapped across a plaid blanket sat, his body barely discernible in the pale light of one table lamp. "Say my name." My voice was more composed than I felt as I commanded. "Plus, why are you even at my house?" As he stared at me with unexpected acuity, the elderly guy widened one large blue eye. As Bethany's stepfather, Arthur Caldwell, who was her mother's spouse, suggests, I had a role in her upbringing, which I categorically did not. He shut his eye once more. "Regarding my purpose here, I was really hoping you could shed some light on the riddle." My mind was racing to come up with the name, and I stood there frozen in shock. Caldwell, Arthur. Yes, Bethany had brought him up. He was the second husband of her mother and a retired professor or performer. His first face-to-face encounter with Bethany was during her mother's funeral last spring. I had a momentary thought. This man was difficult, she had said, and very set in his ways, like staring into a mirror. Will my loved ones ever be found? As I made my way into the living area, I inquired. "Tell me where Robert is. As for Bethany? Is it the kids?" The sound of Arthur Caldwell's exhausted patience was audible as he sighed. "Per your viewpoint, the letter on the table next to you explains everything, or nothing." I looked over and saw some folded paper resting on top of a vase of new chrysanthemums, flowers I definitely hadn't left behind. I anxiously opened the note and saw my son's hastily written signature. My apologies for the last-minute schedule shift, Mom. A cruise package was won by Bethany through her office. Leaving today for a 4-day trip with all expenses covered. They only had 4 spots, but it was too fantastic of an opportunity to pass up. This week, the retirement community where Arthur lives is undergoing fumigation, so he needed a place to stay. Stay away from bedbugs. 2 issues, a single resolution. You two will get along well since you are both as story-filled and obstinate as a mule's. On Monday night, we will return for a Thanksgiving dinner that is a little late. Robert, you are loved. In addition to his dinner, Arthur takes his heart medication. Putting a memo on the refrigerator. Yours faithfully, Mom. It's great having you. I reread the note, sure that I had misread it. Then again, as the gravity of the situation became clear. Someone had departed from the group. To a person. Without prior notice, they abandoned me on Thanksgiving with an unfamiliar individual who evidently need medication and supervision. Is this really true? I spoke out loud, either to myself or to Arthur, that I wasn't sure. Surely there had to be an error. One error at last. Arthur opened both eyes to reply. I noticed a mix of annoyance and conspiracy in his tone, which made me examine him more closely, as if he expected us to docilely accept this arrangement without protest. Arthur Caldwell's face resembled a worn map, complete with lines, history, and uncharted territory. He seemed older than I had imagined, maybe in his mid-80s. He may have looked weak, but there was an intelligence in his blue eyes that made him seem much older than he was. Were you aware of this strategy? A faint grin spread across his face as I inquired. It wasn't until this morning that they dropped me off here with a bag and an apology that was so fake it would make a kindergartner grit his teeth. Something about my propensity to express the unfiltered truth at unsuitable times makes it seem like my presence would ruin Bethany's cruise experience. A reluctance to smile tugged at my lips, even though I knew better. What kind of unfiltered truth could that be? He even went so far as to suggest that Bethany could be trying out for an Annie Get Your Gun performance at the local theater because of her new hairstyle. Or maybe she's right and her kids will develop a neck-free species since they spend so much time glued to screens. I couldn't help but laugh out loud in shock. This acidic sincerity was not what I had anticipated from this outsider. So, Arthur leaned forward ever so slightly and said, "They've left us for the heat and the buffet on the cruise. So, Margaret Walsh, the question is, how are you planning to address this?" My gaze fixed on him. To be honest, I shouldn't have been surprised that he recognized me. Tell me how you know my identity. Aside from the rather apparent context clues? He arched an eyebrow slightly. Your pictures are all over the place, and Bethany spent the entire drive here telling me not to take it personally since you're picky and stubborn. It would appear that we are both troublesome elderly relatives who should be controlled rather than acknowledged as individuals. His evaluation was spot on, and it hurt. Was that my family's impression of me? Managing a problem? A small thinning of Arthur's brow occurred. I believe I have irritated you. That was not my goal. I pulled myself together, keeping my professional dignity, a quality that had been eroded by decades of dealing with disruptive piano students, even if honesty is a habit I've found too rewarding to abandon now. Mr. Caldwell, you have not irritated me. All you've done is validate my long-standing concerns. A sign of unanticipated unity, he nodded. Then maybe we'll learn more about each other than our kids thought. Those shockingly blue eyes of his started to light up with mischief as he leaned forward. Estaremos a punto? Must you forgive me? I speak Portuguese. Is it time to start? When I was younger, I spent a year on sabbatical in Lisbon, and he waved his hand dismissively. They've fooled us with their verbal choices, yet the question remains. It would have been my responsibility to contact Robert right once, demand an explanation and an apology, and arrange to have this stranger removed from my home. Instead, I should have been enraged and spoken up sooner. Instead, I nodded slowly, as if a primal and fulfilling sensation had replaced a lifetime of control and tolerance. Indeed, I stated plainly. I think we should. As I stood in my kitchen, robotically brewing tea, a peculiar octogenarian slept in my living room. The complete ridiculousness of my predicament dawned on me. A hastily written note and an unannounced houseguest ruined my meticulously planned Thanksgiving. The turkey was supposed to be roasting, the tableware was supposed to be laid out, and my family was supposed to be here any second. The interruption from Arthur's voice jolted me out of my reverie. Dairy, no sugar. I had failed to notice him before, but he stood in the doorway, one hand clutching a polished wooden cane. That is, unless you're preparing Earl Grey. If not, just plain water will do. What gave it away that you were brewing tea? Mildly, he grinned. First hint, the kettle was whistling. Extra proof came from the fact that you're British and the time is exactly 4 o'clock. My skin crawled. I am not a Brit. Unless I'm mistaken, my parents are from the UK. I was born and brought up in Boston. When you're irritated, your vowels have a tinge of Sussex, and that posture isn't from public schools in the US. He gingerly made his way to the kitchen table and, with deft accuracy, sat down in a chair. Which is exactly how you are right now. However, I am unsure if this is due to the circumstance or to me. As I filled my grandmother's teapot with hot water, I confessed that it was both. My anxiety was calmed by the familiar routine. You have no idea how irritated I am. A thin line appears over your chin as you elevate your left eyebrow about 3 millimeters and purse your lips slightly. He showed it by tapping his own chin. One becomes acutely aware of micro-expressions after 40 years of directing plays for community theater. Theater, I autocorrected. Theater, with an ear was what you said. However, if you went to England for a while. It seems my suspicions regarding the link to the UK were correct. Satisfaction sparkled in his eyes. Although you're right, after 50 years of academic life in the US, one tends to adopt the local pronunciation. Theater is the proper genre. You may bury old habits all you want, but they won't actually die. Irrationally relieved that I had stocked up on pantry staples before the retreat, I carried the tea tray to set the table. While we sorted out this situation, at least we wouldn't starve. This painstaking adjustment of family tastes, formed over years of holiday feasts, this meal I had prepared, including Robert's beloved cornbread stuffing, Bethany's marshmallow-topped sweet potatoes, and the twins' anticipated requests for additional cranberry sauce, you're freaking out about. I offered Arthur a teacup, and he accepted it with a calm expression. The expression was familiar to me. When our plans were derailed, my late wife would put it on. In a rigid response, I clarified that I am not predicting disaster. My family has dumped me on a huge vacation with a total stranger while they go on a cruise, and I'm quite furious about it. He even went so far as to say that the stranger needed medication. How helpful. Remember that specific requirement. A hesitant grin tugged at my lips, even though I knew better. The reminder is much appreciated. I'm happy to help. He drank his tea with an unusual delicacy considering the severity of his arthritis-related hand pain. Superb concoction. What about Ceylon with a touch of bergamot? I nodded, briefly taken aback by how precise he was. This is the combination that my dad loves. A London specialty shop is where I place my order. Is Portobello Road Stanley's? During my visiting professorship at Oxford in 1982, they supplied the faculty lounge. I had a brief shift in my perception of him. I don't see you as an obstacle or an imposition. I see you as a human being whose background is just as complicated and multifaceted as mine. It was unsettling to realize that my first impression of him was based on the same callousness I despised in my own family. Now that we've covered my tea preferences and your British history, Arthur continued, maybe we should tackle the big issue. Our children are really disrespectful, so what can we do about it? With a firm click, I placed my cup on the table. I will contact Robert first. This can never be tolerated. Arthur wore a cunning look. Think about this before you do that. They're probably already out at sea, where there's no way to get in touch with them. His suspicions were validated when he swiftly checked my cell phone. In the midst of unpacking, a text message arrived. My flight is about to depart. Varies signal strength across the vessel. When it is convenient for us, we will check in. For Arthur, nothing beats classical music and public broadcasting. It will be a breeze for you. I secretly grumbled. They have meticulously plotted their escape. Truly, Arthur reclined, his intense blue eyes fixed on me. Margaret, I want to know if they have been trying to get you to downsize lately. Maybe you could recommend some condos or retirement communities that have activities and services tailored to active seniors? Uncomfortably, the inquiry touched a nerve. What gave it away? He gave me a cynical response as Bethany had been bombarding me with Sunset Palms retirement village brochures for the past 6 months. Following her exact 3-hour presence at her mother's burial. Evidently, I left a lasting impression. They have grouped us together now. Suddenly, a disturbing new idea came to me, and I veered off course. No, you don't believe that. Arthur grimaced and nodded. It seems to me that this small cruise experience is really just a front for a more deliberate plan. Imagine how great it would be if Mom and Arthur got along. They might call that large house their home. Even better would be a lovely Sunset Palms 2-bedroom apartment. One easy remedy was enough for 2 aging relatives. I almost dropped my teacup in rage because the idea was so arrogant and deceptive. Well, isn't that cunning? Condescending? Is that the plot of some average daytime soap opera? Arthur provided a helpful response. That is all. With a sudden leap to my feet, I began to pace restlessly around the kitchen. This house has been my home for more than 40 years. Not even a vengeful old man will be able to convince me to share it with him. He appeared to be daring me to refute the account by arching an eyebrow. Just as I was about to say, stranger, I primly ended my sentence. Without a doubt, you were. Even for a second, his tone suggested he didn't believe me. In any case, it appears that we are facing the same issue and may even have the same goal. I was no longer pacing. Which one is it? Just to make sure this matchmaking method bombs miserably. That they will never again try to manipulate someone in this way. With careful deliberation, he placed his teacup on the table. What matters is if you possess the creativity and resilience to handle whatever that may involve. A latent part of me was reawakened by his tone, which had an air of mischief and challenge all rolled into one. I used to be Maggie, the one who sped from Boston to New York on a whim to see Horowitz perform at Carnegie Hall and who, one summer, taught herself Portuguese because she loved the sound, long before I became Margaret Walsh, a revered piano instructor and pillar of the community. Resuming my seat, I inquired as to your precise intentions. For a man of his age, Arthur's smile was unexpectedly nasty and sluggish. We must first determine the present state of affairs. They are under the impression that they have abandoned 2 elderly people to their fate as they struggle to get by for a few days. Their phone calls will be filled with demands for answers, maybe even some righteous wrath, and then reluctant acceptance. I agreed, taking his logic into consideration. Consequently, we provide them with 0 resources instead. He was done. There was absolutely no communication throughout the first day. I conceded that it will undoubtedly frighten them. But is that sufficient? That is only the beginning, my darling. Arthur leaned forward, his expression suddenly belying the years that had passed. Following the hush, there was bewilderment, communications that were becoming more and more disturbing, alluding to sudden and unexplained changes, and the mental anguish of not knowing what was going on. The delighted vindictiveness in his tone should have horrified me. On the contrary, I was leaning forward, just as absorbed. The messages in question. There's no need to worry. He reassured her there was no need to fret. Situation under control now. Then, a few hours later. Put this out of your minds. I ended by saying, please, don't be mad when you see the living room, as I warmed up to the game. According to Arthur, who answered with a twinkle in his eye, the fire department was really understanding. My voice barely registered as my own as an uninhibited giggle from my lips. When was the last time I laughed so hard? You are bad. Curiously vengeful is more my style, he pointed out. Margaret Walsh, you are far from being the prim and proper person you portray yourself to be. I was expecting the remark to annoy me. Arthur extended his hand across the table and asked, "Are we agreed? Shall we teach our arrogant children a lesson in respecting their elders?" It seemed more like reconnection with a part of myself that I had almost forgotten existed. He extended his hand, and I hesitated just a moment before accepting it. His skin was as thin as paper, yet surprisingly cozy, his hold more intense than I had anticipated. I replied, yes, experiencing a butterflies in my stomach I hadn't felt in a long time. "Mr. Caldwell, I feel obligated to warn you. Arthur is Arthur. I should warn you that there are certain rules that must be followed if we are to share this house for 4 days. I have a very organized household, and you can bet that I don't leave my breakfast dishes anywhere other than the sink, never the dishwasher. I also read aloud when I find particularly interesting passages in books." He looked at me for a moment and nodded solemnly. "I would expect nothing less." I retorted by saying that I sing along with Puccini whenever I eat. Apparently quite loudly. I insist on total quiet while we play Jeopardy. I make sure my spices are in the correct order by sorting them alphabetically. Looking at one another across the table, we were like two solid things weighing the pros and cons of living together. After that, Arthur beamed. An honest look that rejuvenated his aged countenance. "I think this might be the start of a really intriguing Thanksgiving after all, Margaret." We started our psychological war that night after I showed Arthur to the guest room and we worked out the details of sharing the bathroom. Each of us in the morning and evening. A routine that accommodated his early rise times while also accommodating my penchant for evening baths. It turned out that the medicine that Robert had specified was just a blood pressure pill, which Arthur could easily take on his own. I am deeply grateful. After 15 years of taking it, he observed dryly in response to my reminder that I've managed to stay alive without your son's watchful eye. Here I am, sitting in the living room with a hurriedly put-together dinner of cold turkey sandwiches. Neither of us didn't miss the irony of eating the Thanksgiving bird in such a casual way. We developed our initial strategic message. The most important part. Arthur held my phone between his arthritic fingers as he demonstrated the art of subtlety. We aim for pessimism in the absence of specific cues so that they can react accordingly. I nodded, strangely energized by the antics we were planning. Because of this, we make no mention of our sadness over their departure. Just so. That is the expectation they have. Explanation is required by righteous outrage. Pleasant acceptance followed by cryptic concern is what we give them, which is far more disconcerting. He was really precise with his sluggish typing. "Wishing you a delightful cruise. I am getting along swimmingly with Arthur. Past events are not a cause for concern. Things are now under control. My best regards, Mom." At an earlier time? While looking over his shoulder, I asked. That's incredibly nebulous. Their curiosity will be piqued. Very much so. He sent it out with style. It is time to wait. We were hardly kept waiting. Robert responded shortly after my phone rang. What transpired before to this? Is he doing all right? I thought of a chess master whose queen he had just captured when I saw Arthur smile. For the next 2 hours, we will remain silent. Soak that question in thought. His psychological sensitivity was remarkable to me. They will be concerned, even though I doubted this approach wasn't needlessly harsh. He clarified, they will be perplexed. Distinction exists. Considering they left us on a big holiday without asking, I think it's fair to say they deserve to be wondered about. With that wording, it was difficult to dispute. Putting down the phone, I became engrossed in researching my unexpected accomplice. With his white hair carefully combed, his cardigan devoid of the food stains that frequently revealed the tremors of age, and his stance amazingly straight despite his years, Arthur Caldwell portrayed a dignified image of aging in the warm light of the lamp. He noticed that you were staring at him without raising his gaze from the newspaper he had taken from my coffee table. Is this a case of turkey face or are you rethinking our partnership? Both, I confessed. All I'm doing is attempting to make sense of the Arthur Caldwell that Bethany described. With care, he folded the paper. My stepdaughter criticized me, but what exactly did she say? The fact that you're unyielding in your beliefs and that you speak your thoughts without regard for the feelings of others around you. Emotional state. Surprisingly, he let out a laugh. Though all evaluations are partial, they are all fair. Had I mentioned that for 30 years I oversaw the theater department at Berkeley? Also, did you know that I am bilingual? Maybe it's just that my coco vin is the best. Unfortunately, she was unsuccessful. I am intrigued by the nuances that are intentionally left out while crafting a story. From my side table, he took a book, a biography of Glenn Gould, that I had been reading in preparation for the retreat. There he is. A pianist whose views are as robust as his playing. Do you know his 1955 Goldberg Variations recording? It was a shocking question. My elite students learn it from me. The pacing is divisive, but the counterpoint is quite clear. Arthur's expression changed to one of true curiosity. Oh, so you play music? Additionally, Bethany omitted that detail. I verified. I've been a piano teacher for 42 years. Although I am now in a semi-retired state, I do have a few of devoted students. Yet another thing they forgot to include in their calculations, he thought to himself. Without taking into account what we might genuinely share in common, they paired us according to our age and how difficult they thought it would be. Curiosity piqued, he gently tapped the book. Are you someone who plays Bach? Each morning. I was the one who confessed. My meditation is the placid clavier. Is that so? For the first time, I saw him hesitating, which revealed his lack of certainty. Would you like to play a game? Months have passed since I last experienced live music. A keyboardist who plays The Girl from Ipanema, whenever he gets the chance, is the entertainment choice for the retirement home. The request came as a surprise, but it was nonetheless accepted. My safe haven and most effective means of expression have always been music. My most prized item, a baby grand piano that I had diligently cared for over the years and had bought with my first year's salary as a teacher, sat in the corner of my living room as I silently approached it. After finding a comfortable spot on the bench and calming myself for a while, I started playing the C major prelude from Book I of the Well-Tempered Clavier. As I played, my fingertips caressed the piano, and the mathematical precision of Bach's arpeggios filled the living room. I shut my eyes and allowed my muscle memory to lead the way as I played the piece I had practiced countless times. I looked up to see Arthur staring at me with a look of deep gratitude as I finished and opened my eyes. His comment was unusual in my experience. You play beautifully. He was straightforward and precise without sacrificing musicality. The sincere compliment had a greater impact on me than if it had been too dramatic or embellished. Much obliged. What about trying something different? He inquired. Maybe something less regimented? Who is Chopin? After giving it some thought, I gave a silent nod. Actually, I believe Debussy would be the perfect fit here. A wave in the water. I was captivated by the impressionistic harmonies and played for Arthur with the same intensity one would save for a recital. His listening style necessitated respect because of the genuine interest, focus, and engagement it displayed. A pleasant quietness enveloped us as the last chords dwindled. My phone's ring interrupted the silence. Robert once more. My mother? Am I to understand that everything is now under control? What transpired? Kindly contact me once you receive this. The clock caught Arthur's eye. A mere 90 minutes. I was surprised by how quickly he broke. With a hint of motherly shame, I added that he has always been worried by nature. Finishing firmly, Arthur said that maybe we might continue down this path. Never lose sight of our original goal. They handled us as if we were just another set of clumsy old people to be controlled and handled as needed. They are willing to endure a few hours of uncertainty as a minor cost. My determination was fortified in that light. A new message was typed by me. Have no fear, my love. Arthur was quite useful. He was a real asset thanks to his background in the theater. Loving this beautiful evening right now. There is also intermittent signal strength here. No doubt it's the weather. After reading it, Arthur gave a nod of approval. Excellent. The word tremendously helpful means that someone was able to have a significant impact, while the allusion to my theater background implies that a performance or staging was necessary. Vaguely masterful. I also mentioned that we had an excuse not to accept calls due to the patchy signal, but I took that idea from their playbook, so it doesn't really feel creative. Efficacy takes precedence over creativity in psychological warfare. A yawn was muted by Arthur. I think I'll call it a night. We will escalate tomorrow. I couldn't help but think about the peculiar twist my Thanksgiving had taken as I got ready for bed later that night. My usual family supper, complete with awkward small talk and fake gratitude, had been replaced by a complex scheme involving a man I'd known for less than 8 hours. Even stranger was the surge of energy I experienced as a result of the endeavor. I don't remember the last time I felt this invested, this challenged intellectually. I had become so used to my routines that I had ceased seeing their limitations. For example, I would teach the identical pieces to various students. Going to the same social gatherings yearly with the same friends, and following the same routines when making holiday dinner. Arthur Caldwell's sharp tongue and dramatic plotting had thrown a wrench into my well-planned life. I was actually anticipating tomorrow's developments in our little drama as I drew nearer to sleep. It took me a second to identify the sensation as anticipation because it was so foreign to me. I seriously wondered that this union was what our children had in mind when they threw us together. As I eventually gave in to sleep, the thought made me grin. Concerning the entire matter, the fire department displayed a great deal of understanding. Arthur stood in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in pressed pants and a cardigan, despite the early hour, when I looked up from my coffee. His hair was nicely styled, and he had obviously shaven with great attention to detail. He obviously had very high expectations for his appearance, regardless of his physical constraints. "Pardon me?" I inquired, my mind still clouded from a night of remarkably realistic dreams. He went cautiously to the coffee pot to clarify our next message. Insinuated property damage was something I was afraid we might get into. Their world will come crashing down when they hear the fire department's comment. I looked at the time. 7:15 a.m. Evidently, you've been strategizing psychological warfare since the break of morning. We can make use of insomnia. After steadily pouring coffee, he sat down at the kitchen table with me. Your phone is now muted, as an additional service I have rendered. Since 6 a.m., I have 3 missed calls and 7 text messages. I must say, your boy is quite dogged. I felt another pang of shame as I admitted that Robert had always worried too much. His demand for confirmation was persistent even when he was a little boy. And I assume you've done it with utmost dedication. Arthur only observed without passing judgment. Developing a habit that persists into adulthood where he anticipates that you will relieve his discomfort while being entirely at ease with causing you anxiety. It was a very accurate evaluation. Just how many times have I changed my plans to meet Robert's demands? How many times had I put his ease ahead of my own? Let me remind you, they're on a cruise ship. Just how much harm could our messaging actually cause? It is expected that they will be having fun. That was exactly it, Arthur said, clearly enjoying his coffee. Great beer, incidentally. Our independence is sacrificed for their pleasure. A little inconvenience seems to be a reasonable trade-off. He was right. I took out my phone and looked over the growing proof of Robert's worry. My mother, what is happening? So, you're saying that Arthur benefited from his time spent performing on stage? Are these messages reaching you? Send a call whenever it is convenient for you. Listen, Mom, we're really concerned. Why was it necessary to get this under control? A break-in may have occurred, according to Bethany. Is it the event in question? It is our intention to recover the ship's satellite phone. We will contact you at the earliest opportunity. They're making a beautiful spiral. As he read behind my back, Arthur made an observation. I am very impressed by the break-in theory. It is something I would never have considered. We're not doing a good job. However, my words lacked conviction. What we're doing is educational. That was his mistake, he said. After some thought, I typed, "Good morning from a beautiful Vermont day. in response to the fire department's message. You won't have to use satellite phones. It's all good now. Thanks to Arthur's quick thinking and the understanding fire crew, no severe harm occurred. My curtains were the subject of your considerate criticism during our previous appointment, and now you'll be getting the new ones you requested. Get the most out of your cruise. As I showed Arthur the message, he complimented the clever curtain detail. Relatively dull in comparison to the fire department reference, but sufficiently detailed to be believed. The ebb and flow of emotions is stunning. I said, before I could think twice, that I'm uncovering a spiteful streak that I didn't realize I had. Not spiteful, Arthur clarified. Encouraging oneself. Distinction exists. He took in my spotless kitchen, with its well-arranged cabinets and shiny surfaces. I think it's time for breakfast now. Are eggs available? I am quite good at making omelets. So, you're the chef. My voice betrayed the shock I was feeling. Margaret, it's been 20 years since I lived alone. Many people mistakenly believe that as men reach their golden years, they suddenly become utterly illiterate. Passing. With the assurance of someone who is at ease in any kitchen, he started opening cabinets. My wife Clara was a master chef, but she insisted I get my foundational skills first. Something about art, she would speak. You can conduct a respectable bechamel if you can conduct King Lear. I couldn't help but smile as I imagined this stuffy, almost scary man being gently scolded by his wife. There are eggs on the fridge door and cheese in the drawer under the veggies. While Arthur skillfully made breakfast, I couldn't help but wonder what else I had gotten wrong about him. I couldn't help but question how much of my initial animosity stemmed from injustice and how much from the ageism that I despised in my own family. Keep looking at the stove and thinking too loudly. Arthur couldn't help but notice that you were doing it again. I objected because I am confused. Margaret, your eyebrows are so expressive. In a way, they serve as a mental semaphore. With the flick of his wrist, he skillfully folded the omelet. Currently, they are stating. I am now rethinking my initial assumptions about this peculiar elderly man. I find myself laughing uncontrollably. Do you often see things this clearly, or am I just really open and honest today? Probably both. He placed an exquisitely cooked omelet on a platter and adorned it with a delicate flourish. It is breakfast time. The omelet was delicious, it was fluffy, savory, and made with herbs that I don't think I ever bought. While we were eating, I couldn't help but reminisce about other Thanksgivings, like the one where Robert tried to deep-fry a turkey in the garage or the one where Bethany's pumpkin pie experiment turned into a makeshift fire drill. I had to explain that they weren't always this way, even though Arthur hadn't asked for a reason. Hence, overseeing. When Robert called, it was usually just to chat, not to remind me to change the furnace filter or to set up an appointment with the doctor. According to Arthur, the change normally happens slowly. Here we have a thoughtful inquiry, and there we have an unneeded prompt. The parent-child dynamic has already reversed by the time you notice the pattern. Tell me when it happened to you. Excuse me? I inquired. His expressive face was cast into shadow. After Clara's pancreatic cancer diagnosis, which took 6 months to reach its final stages, he cleared his throat. Not once, but twice, did Bethany fly in. Once at the funeral and once after her mother's diagnosis. During that time, she oversaw my transfer to the right care by phone. His voice carried the insertion of quotation marks. I expressed my sincere apologies for Clara and Bethany's reaction. He made a gesture to dismiss the concern, but it was still noticeable. Old past. This has been going on for 3 years. However, it seems that was long enough for Bethany to realize that, despite my successful independent existence, I require sufficient monitoring. My phone rang to alert me of a video call request before I could answer. Using the ship's wireless network or satellite phone, Robert. Arthur was shown the screen by me. Should we stop their suffering by answering? Excuse me? I inquired. Wait a second, he thought to himself. Refuse to take the call and instead say that you are now assisting the insurance adjuster. I followed the advice. After that, put the phone down. They'll be absolutely ecstatic right about now. Okay, Arthur firmly stated. Make them feel even a little bit as helpless as they made us feel. What are we going to do today? Surely you had intentions beyond subjecting yourself to mental anguish? I wasn't expecting that inquiry. On a typical day after Thanksgiving, what would I do? Play the piano, sure thing. Maybe have a look at some literature. Gather your loved ones around the phone and swap holiday tales. In light of the present conspiracies, none of it appeared very convincing. It was an impulsive decision, but I think we should redecorate, I added. Curious, Arthur arched his bushy eyebrows. I warmed up to the concept and emphasized that we should follow through if we're alleging that fire damage required new curtains. For a long time, I despised those draperies in the living room. Way too stuffy, and while we're about it, maybe the furniture arrangement needs rethinking, too. Arthur nodded in agreement, praising the dramatic realism. Margaret, your dedication to the role is admirable. It was more than that, I confessed. I've been thinking about making some changes for a while, but being still is really holding me back. It appears that this is the ideal chance. Arthur pondered the prospect of a house renovation job with a reticent elderly person he had only known for a day. In my opinion, this idea has no potential drawbacks. I sensed sincere laughter rather than resentment in his tone, which was dry. I offered a reasonable point. We need evidence of our bonding during their absence if we want to persuade them that we've grown closer. Plus, you've been on stage before. You must have designed a couple of sets when you were younger. Created, orchestrated, and sometimes dismantled in tantrums of creative temperament, he verified with a subtle grin. All right, Margaret. We should redecorate. But I should probably just warn you, I feel quite strongly about certain patterns in fabric. Even I, taken aback by my own passion for the project, responded that I would have expected nothing less. How long had it been since I'd decided on the spur of the moment to make a modification to my meticulously kept house? We should probably hit the stores. You should be able to find appropriate selections at the local fabric store. A look of uncertainty crossed Arthur's face. Going shopping could be difficult. My mobility has diminished. In an attempt at irony, he tapped his cane. In particular, long periods of walking and stairs cause a lot of pain. I respected his candor and his obvious unease with admitting weakness because it was his first admission of physical constraint. We'll take my car, I said with an air of seriousness. We can eat lunch at Gibson's and use the fabric store's ramp and spacious aisles. The soup is delicious, and there's a convenient table by the window. His customary sarcastic humor swiftly concealed the relief in his eyes. Have my geriatric care plans been finalized? As a nurse, you've been neglecting your true calling. Actually, I responded fairly neutrally. I'm just trying to be realistic here. Also, self-centered. In addition to wanting soup at Gibson's, having you along for the adventure would liven it up a bit. After giving me a brief look, he nodded with an air of unexpected seriousness. Margaret, I am graciously accepting your offer. Nevertheless, I will insist on paying for lunch because of your kindness. With a businesslike gesture, I extended my hand and said, agreed, but I should probably warn you first. Window coverings are a topic on which I feel strongly. He repeated, I would expect nothing less, as he shook hands firmly despite the roughness of his grasp. His hurried text came as my phone buzzed again as we worked together to clear the breakfast dishes, him washing and me drying in a cadence that seemed remarkably natural. My mother? Please tell the insurance adjuster what happened. If anything major goes wrong, we need to disembark at the next port. Arthur quickly glanced at the message and grinned that naughty grin that made him look less serious and more playful. Just right. We are well on track with the next stage of our plan, he said. The fabric business lived up to my memory, a Main Street gem nestled between a hardware store and a bakery, a sanctuary of patterns and textures. The fact that it would be so much different with Arthur along was something I hadn't thought about before. He had unfiltered views that were startlingly perceptive and sharp. The nuance of a community theater is captured by that hue of burgundy. Lady Macbeth, he said as I raised a heavy damask. Fascinating in concept but a real pain in execution. What do you think, Professor Caldwell? I was more amused than offended by his candor as he strolled down the aisle, tapping his foot thoughtfully on the floor, until he came to a display of lighter textiles. This, he continued, gesturing at a linen that was steel blue in color and had a faint herringbone pattern. It adds personality without taking over the space, and it would look great next to your Aubusson rug in the living room. I looked over his choices, taken aback by his aesthetic sense and his attention to detail. He had spotted my rug, after all. To top it all off, the blue was just right, elegant without being stuffy, substantial without being overwhelming. Totally not my style, but it works wonderfully in that room. I included the cloth to our expanding collection and acknowledged that you have an excellent eye. I had been a set designer for 40 years, he reminded me. The fabric of a production has the power to completely transform its look. Our picking process took so long that we ended up with fabric for my entry hall runner, new toss cushions, and curtains for my living room. The sum exceeded my budget, but I was pleasantly surprised by how exciting it was to think about updating rooms that had remained unchanged for almost a decade. What about lunch? As we piled all of our belongings into my car, I made a suggestion. You can walk down the block to Gibson's. Arthur gave a nod, but I saw that he was leaning on his cane more than before. His endurance had obviously been tested by our shopping adventure, but he didn't say anything about it. He appeared resolute in minimizing his limitations, maybe even to an unhealthy degree, challenging another assumption. Although Gibson's was bustling with post-Thanksgiving shopping, the owner, Maureen, saw us right away. Margaret, she summoned as she wended her way between the tables to welcome us. Your absence yesterday was felt. How was the retreat? I said, very centered, as I swiftly accepted her embrace. Hello, Maureen. My name is Arthur Caldwell, and I am here for the holiday weekend to meet with some family friends. Arthur extended a hand in a manner typical of the past. Sure thing, Maureen. Your soup is the best in 3 counties, according to Margaret. Charmer, Maureen was visibly happy as she laughed. The window table is yours, including dessert, if you ask me nicely. Accompany me. I saw a hint of Arthur's wink as she guided us to a table basking in the sun that looked out over the town center. He had cleverly used his charisma to get us the best seats without mentioning that he needed special assistance getting around. Wise guy. Close associate. When Maureen departed with our directions, he began to wonder. A unique adjective to employ when describing your reticent houseguest. Would you have been more comfortable with the complete stranger that my kids left me with for Thanksgiving? No, I said in response. True, however awkward for a first meeting. A mischievous glint appeared in his eyes. I do believe, though, that we have moved beyond the stage of being mere strangers. At the very least, reluctant accomplices. My offer was to be their unlikely ally. That title is okay to me. The town square, with its gazebo and old oak trees, caught his eye as he peered out the window. Stunning city. This is your home for a long time, right? I verified 43 years of residence in the same dwelling. After we left Boston, Robert was 5 years old. James, my spouse, had taken a job at the university. Where does music belong? Based on his best guess, Arthur decided. In fact, it's chemical. In my family, I was the musician. When I thought about James, I felt a familiar pang, not the sudden, crushing loss of a spouse, but the dull agony of a large void. His heart attack occurred 12 years ago while he was shoveling snow. Arthur agreed, needing no empty cliches about other worlds or wounds that heal in time. Instead, he mentioned that Clara was 15 years ago. Depends on the day, it seems like yesterday or a lifetime ago. True enough. I was appreciative of his comprehension, so I agreed. Soup made with butternut squash, apple, and sage came with freshly baked crusty bread. While we dined, we enjoyed each other's company in quiet communion, brought together just by the shared experience of delicious cuisine. In due time, Arthur, your son, said. Does he have any idea of your true abilities? The skilled performer? Keeping a house, teaching piano, and planning a complicated Christmas feast, that's the woman. I wasn't expecting that inquiry. He does, without a doubt. We were childhood friends. For the most part, kids only perceive their parents in the most limited light. Arthur noticed that they were totally preoccupied with their parental roles, oblivious to the broader humanity that existed underneath those titles. While slicing off yet another piece of bread, I thought about this. Maybe you're absolutely correct. James passed away when Robert was quite little. He entered a protective role shortly after graduating from college and never really emerged from it. Arthur assumed. You proved year after year that you were more than capable of handling the situation. I explained that my desire to protect my son, even in light of our current plan, stems from a place of love. Within families, control resides primarily. Instead of passing judgment, Arthur's tone exuded a subtle understanding. We fool ourselves into thinking we're defending one another, but in reality, we're just trying to avoid facing our own fears, fear of change, loss, and death. I was about to answer when my phone started buzzing relentlessly. Robert has sent another message. Mom, we're boarding a plane home tomorrow after disembarking at the port. Evidently, a major event has transpired. Just let us know if you're okay. A pang of true shame stabbed me when I showed Arthur the message. Maybe we've gone too far now. He gave careful attention to the text. Nassau is our next stop. If the itinerary is typical for the Caribbean, that would entail foregoing at least 2 days of their cruise and shelling out a hefty sum for travel at the last minute. I was adamant about the reasons we should cease. Rather than ruining a vacation, this was intended to be a minor lesson. A grin crept into Arthur's face. Obviously, you're correct. He paused to consider that there are limits to escalation. How about we change course, refocusing the action instead of putting an end to it altogether? Give me your opinion. A statement that calms their fears right away while keeping our story of sudden events going. Everything is absolutely fine, he said after giving it some thought. Your trip plans won't need to be altered. The fire was contained because it was a minor event in the kitchen. The process of redesigning and getting to know Arthur has been very delightful. This is such a surprising link. I showed him the outcome after typing as he spoke, so he could relax and enjoy the rest of the vacation. I thought it was a wonderful touch that the flames was surrounded by quotation marks, implying that we're trying to hide the true nature of the matter. The air of mystery around this unexpected relationship piques their interest without causing them to freak out. He concurred. They get exactly what they wanted, a change in focus from fear for their safety to interest in our budding romance. But it's not how they had envisioned it. After hitting send, I put my phone down. Arthur Caldwell, your strategy is spot on. Replying with a subtle grin, he said that 40 years of academic politics educate one to plot multiple moves ahead. However, I must confess that this game is far more entertaining than the faculty budget discussions. Back at my car, we went after finishing our soup and the promised dessert, a maple cream brulee that Arthur pronounced exquisite. His energy levels had obviously dropped from the morning's exertions, and he was walking at a much slower pace now. As we went home, I subtly proposed that we postpone the redecorating for tomorrow, trying to portray it as a scheduling choice rather than an attempt to alleviate his exhaustion. Being able to see through the facade while gracefully accepting it, he acknowledged that it was likely prudent. Tasks for tomorrow based on today's reconnaissance. Proper pacing is essential for good theater. Upon returning home, I made Arthur take a nap while I made a simple supper. His lack of resistance caught me off guard. He took a seat in the living room with a poetry anthology that belonged to James. He was fast asleep in the armchair, with his book open on his lap, by the time I had put together a basic lunch of soup, pre-retreat prepped, and fresh bread from Gibson's. I lingered on him for a second. This haughty, vehement man who had been thrust into my life against my will was quickly becoming into a friend. While he slept, his normally tough exterior melted away, exposing the vulnerable side of his personality that he had been trying to hide all day. I got up from where he was resting and went to play my piano quietly. More plotting, redecorating, and surprising alliances with this strange man would await tomorrow, as Debussy's Clair de Lune, with its delicate impressionism, filled the house with serene sorrow. For the time being, though, I am strangely appreciative of the interruption to my solitary pattern. Robert responded to my phone ringing, and his message was one of relief and apparent confusion. He wanted to know that we were safe, but he also wanted additional information quickly. I turned it off without saying anything. The match would resume the following day. Tonight was a night for music, isolation, and the peculiar serenity that comes from sharing it with an unexpected companion. As I stood back to take stock of our labor, I voiced my skepticism over the furniture alignment. It had been more of a physical challenge than expected, but we had spent the morning remodeling my living room. Now the sofa is taking up too much. Slightly out of breath but victorious, Arthur shook his head. Your perception is clouded by memories rather than reality. The fireplace, which is beautiful but rarely utilized, was the focal point of the previous layout. He made a wide hand gesture toward this. Instead of sitting in a row, this arrangement makes room for people to talk to each other. I tried to look at the room dispassionately as I thought about his point. In order to make separate seating spaces, we flipped my sofa on its side, floated 2 armchairs across from it, and rearranged the side tables. Even though the piano was still in its designated spot, it no longer felt isolated from the rest of the room. It does seem more planned, I must confess. It's not like random pieces of furniture that occurred to pile up over the years, as Arthur non-judgmentally pointed out. He was absolutely correct. Most homes develop organically rather than intentionally. We tack on items as we need them, arrange them for convenience, and eventually we stop paying attention to them. When was the last time I took a good, hard look at my living room, a space I used every day? I realized how invisible it had grown, comfortable but unconsidered, due to familiarity. I proudly said that the curtains would be sewed next, gesturing towards the cloth we had thrown over a chair. I must admit, it has been quite a while since I last sewn anything of this magnitude. Thankfully, you have access to people with experience in the theater, Arthur said as he gingerly lowered himself onto the freshly arranged couch. Throughout my life, I have made a wide variety of things, including tentacles from aliens and Renaissance dance costumes. I am more than capable of hanging curtains. My eyebrow was arched. Do you weave? Even though I eventually became an expert in stage direction and set design, my theatrical training included costume design. He looked at the cloth like a specialist. Would you like me to use your sewing machine or do it by hand? I responded, still trying to make sense of this new facet of Arthur's skills, in the spare bedroom closet. It might require cleaning, however I haven't used it for a long time. With a little help from his cane, he got to his feet and proposed that they look into it. Except if you'd rather take a nap first. We've spent a good chunk of time on this. I was moved by the thoughtfulness in his voice. He worried about my endurance even though he was clearly exhausted. Though I may have been a little too aggressive, I reassured him that I was all right and suggested that we get some coffee before moving on to another assignment. Arthur perused the photos stuck to my fridge as I made a new pot of soup. There were pictures of Robert's family at different ages, as well as some older ones of James and myself when we were younger. He pointed to a fading photo from the 1970s and said, "You have your father's profile. You've given it to Robert. There is a very noticeable genetic echo." I took a quick look at the picture, which I had seen countless times that it barely registered in my mind anymore. Arthur had a point. In profile, the similarity between the 3 generations was plain to see. James thought that Robert exhibited more Walsh than Sullivan traits. My resolve and musical sensibilities. What exactly was Robert's inheritance from his dad? I was taken aback by the question. His sharp intellect. His meticulousness. An unexpected recollection made me grin. He made awful puns. The use of James's wordplay might bring an entire room to its knees. Arthur stated with gravity that it was a valuable bequest. Just like my Clara, she had a penchant for language pranks. "Arthur, you put the pun in punctilious," she would say. There was an air of affection in his description of his late wife that made me picture a lively, humorous woman who would have been a welcome contrast to Arthur's reserved demeanor. As I offered him a cup of coffee, I noticed that he seemed to miss her. He assured me daily, though the form of the absent gradually softens and becomes more ingrained in my identity apart from her. My personal experience of the development of grief was spot on with the description. Yeah, I said that. True enough. With our coffee in hand, we made our way to the guest bedroom, where I retrieved my sewing machine from its hiding place. I was pleasantly surprised by how good of shape everything was. Almost undamaged, with just a thin layer of dust. Singer 301, Arthur said with a smile. An efficient machine. Similar like Clara, she had a model. Arthur meticulously measured and tagged our fabric as I tended to the machine. I made flawless seams by using pins from an old sewing basket. As if we were seasoned pros, we coordinated our efforts with startling ease. We were halfway through the second pair of curtains and had finished the first by late afternoon. Together, we are a formidable force. Arthur fed cloth into the machine as I steered it, and I watched. He was in agreement, however I worry our kids would be surprised to see such peace in our home. It casts doubt on their view of us as introverted, troublesome beings. Regarding that matter, I stole a quick look at my phone. Robert has contacted me 3 times more, inquiring about the nature of our unexpected connection. Will we have to reply? Arthur had a mischievous glint in his eye. In a word, yes. However, let's provide them with something clear that is also vague. Truly astonish them. It was a pleasure to hear from you, I typed after giving it some thought. Rearranging the living room and creating new curtains have kept Arthur and me quite busy. The location is completely unfamiliar to you. Bach and Debussy are 2 composers that we both adore. Arthur has the most difficult Scrabble game I've played in a long time, even though I defeated him decisively the night before. I don't see the point in checking in so often. It is really fantastic. For my part, kiss the kids. Arthur gave it a thumbs up after reading it behind my back. The suggestion of a night spent playing Scrabble is a great example of how to casually convey a sense of household coziness without resorting to obvious romanticism. After seeing that we weren't playing Scrabble, I brought it up. Just a small thing. Without a doubt, we could have. On my nightstand rested an old clock, and his eyes darted to it. However, it would be wise to do so in order to keep the storyline consistent. Actually, I'm quite good at word games. Does that constitute an obstacle, Professor Caldwell? My own playfulness caught me off guard, so I asked. Mrs. Walsh, I just wanted to make a comment. His response was overly formal, but I would be irresponsible to say no to a contest if you were to propose one. We put down our sewing machines and went to the kitchen to set up the Scrabble board as the afternoon light began to fade into dusk. Arthur methodically set the board and tiles as I made a basic dinner, a reheated quiche and a fresh salad, using ingredients I had in the freezer. As we took our seats at the table, he wanted to know the ground rules. As I was plating the quiche, I clarified that the rules were as follows: no proper nouns, only standard dictionary words, and no intentional blockage to add difficulty. Oh, you've dealt with strategists before, he noted as he nodded gratefully and accepted a dish. Word building, not defensive play, will be my priority. What ensued was a Scrabble match that challenged me more than any I had played in a long time. The method Arthur employed was nuanced but successful, and his language was out of this world. While playing, I drew on linguistic knowledge I hadn't accessed since jam sessions with James on snowy college weekends. With a flourish, Arthur placed his tiles and stated that it was quixotic on a triple-word score. 72 points, if my math is correct. It was appreciated, and I moaned. Excellent, but you've created a space for. I connected to his X and extended to a double-word score by laying down my tiles to form Byzantine. I couldn't help but let out a satisfied sigh as I calculated 57 points. Recognizing the move, he studied the board with admiration. I was unprepared for how strong of an opponent you would out to be. I challenged you, but I didn't mean any disrespect. You obviously thought I'd be easy prey. Absolutely not. I had never idea a piano teacher could be so aggressively strategic. Some of the most competitive individuals you will ever meet are classical musicians. I told him that he should witness the psychological warfare that goes on during auditions for conservatories. I had never heard him laugh before. It was a deep, uninhibited sound. I see your point. A symphony orchestra, according to Clara, can't tell when their prey is dead, but a pack of wolves can. Our game was peppered with increasingly casual talk as the evening flew by in a friendly rivalry. Arthur shared stories of avoiding theatrical disasters, navigating academic politics, and his own parenting mistakes with his two sons, who now live on the West Coast. I found myself reminiscing about stories from my childhood, about James, my early career struggles, and Robert's. He claimed that they call faithfully on holidays when I inquired why they weren't there during his recent health problems. Remember to send birthday gifts that are suitable. Geographical and emotional separation, however, can harden into immutability. The subtle hint of isolation in his casual account struck a chord. In reality, how changed was my dynamic with Robert? Emotional remoteness persisted despite physical closeness. Our battle ended with Arthur prevailing by a razor-thin 12 points, a result so narrow that it necessitated a rematch the very next night. In pleasant silence, we cleared the board. Unexpectedly, Arthur said, "Thank you," as I returned the game box to its shelf. "What is the purpose? Let you beat me at Scrabble?" His tone was unusually serious as he explained that today was an exception. This game, the rearrangement, and the sewing all need it. I am grateful that you looked at me as an individual with value rather than an elderly burden that needed to be handled with care. I was taken aback by the sincere appreciation. In all candor, I must say that you have been anything but troublesome. Actually, I've really liked having company, even if they came in such a manipulative way. There was real warmth in his smile, along with a touch of his signature wryness. Not for the reasons they planned, but because of the unexpected friendship they helped arrange. Maybe we should thank our kids for their matchmaking services after all. Echoing the word, I put friendship to the test. In my opinion, that is exactly what this is developing into. My phone beeped with yet another message from Robert. This one had a snapshot of the family aboard the cruise ship, their faces contorted into a grin as they tried to seem carefree despite their obvious ongoing worry about what was happening back home. As he glanced at the photo, Arthur noted that they appeared depressed, as if their guilt was dragging them down from their Caribbean paradise. "Very well," I responded, my tone surprisingly forceful. "Maybe now they'll think twice before deciding on our behalf without consulting us." Arthur saluted by raising an imaginary glass. 2 results. Let them serve as learning experiences for everyone. I raised my glass to my lips in an imitation of his motion. May unforeseen partnerships never cease to amaze us. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crystal clarity that is characteristic of Vermont in the late fall. The air was crisp with the approach of winter, but the sun's rays held the last vestiges of summer's warmth. I woke up earlier than normal, my thoughts already planning the day's events before I ever stepped foot on the floor. This feeling of expectation, this understated enthusiasm to start the day, was strange after months of mornings that had become monotonous. I hadn't even realized there were patterns that had become stagnant after spending 3 days with Arthur Caldwell. I bundled myself in my robe and padded stealthily downstairs, assuming the kitchen would be deserted at this ungodly hour. In its place, Arthur stood at the breakfast bar, seemingly preparing a complex dish by meticulously slicing fruit. Going to the coffee maker, which was 3/4 full, I noticed that you were up early. Lifelong habit, he responded sans looking up. Time constraints in the classroom are severe. Also, the only time I could count on to have complete mental clarity was first thing in the morning. Now, even though retirement is supposed to provide more freedom, my body still won't wake up past 6 in the morning. As I poured coffee for each of us, I confessed that it was mine too, though I generally use that time to practice piano. If you want to practice sight reading in the morning, the living room is the place to do so. A grateful nod was all it took for him to take the coffee. "Hey, I overheard you yesterday at about 5:30. I believe that is Bach's Italian concerto. This is the presto thing." I was taken aback by the observation. "Listen carefully." As he resumed his culinary duties, he mentioned that Clara was the family musician. Being so close to someone who played cello for the Berkeley Symphony for 20 years meant that some information had to find its way in. New information uncovered. This stuffy guy had been introduced to classical music by his wife and had spent decades immersed in it thanks to his theatrical experience and literary references. A new thread uniting our seemingly unrelated lives was the acknowledgement of shared cultural territory, which seemed meaningful in its own way. "What are you fabricating?" As I glanced over his shoulder at the spread of fruits, bread, and what looked like a battered Dutch baby pancake, I inquired, "What's Clara's specialty?" He gave me a vague answer, as if he were suddenly unsure of his culinary abilities, and I thought, maybe it's because it's Sunday. "The kitchen on my own." With a swift reassurance, I told him it looked great. "For breakfast, I often have coffee and toast." He regained his self-assurance and said that it was nutritionally inadequate. "What are your expectations for today's intellectual and physical challenges?" "A hearty breakfast should help prepare you for them." "Professor Caldwell," I inquired, finding his tone of authority amusing as he paused to think, then gingerly placed the pan in the oven. He paused, the throw cushions awaited their new coverings, and the drapes still needed finishing. "For the benefit of a single, grateful fan, I was hoping you might be open to playing longer sets." I was taken aback by the request, which was presented with a lack of usual confidence. Since when did someone express a desire to listen to me play? My parents and pupils took my displays as lessons. Not for show, although Robert and his family were plainly occupied with other matters, they patiently put up with my antics during our visits. Although my repertoire has become somewhat limited with age, I would be more than pleased to play for you if you would like. Liszt and Rachmaninoff are becoming more difficult to play due to arthritis. Arthur responded in a matter-of-fact manner, saying that all musicians do repertoire editing over time. Instead of giving up, the wise ones change. Towards the end of her life, Clara began focusing on Baroque pieces. Less time spent extending oneself, more time to express oneself technically. Once again, that eye-opening information, conveyed without patronizing or sympathetic tone, just plain old common sense from someone who knows what it's like to be a musician. As I set the table and Arthur Caldwell made a basic fruit compote to go with the pancake, I confessed that you never cease to amaze me. "Sure thing," he responded with a mischievous grin. "Stability hinders participation." I used to tell Clara that the reason she remained with me for 43 years was because I always said something unexpected. Contrarily, James was. Unexpectedly, I started talking. Unwaveringly trustworthy, totally predictable. No matter what, I could always count on his predictable reaction. I felt a sense of relief. Arthur noted that various personalities necessitate distinct companions. Having a stabilizing influence helps those with a theatrical temperament. Dependable rhythms may be the key to the musical one's success. Unexpectedly perceptive was the insight. My response was cut short when the oven timer went off. Arthur took out a pancake that was just right, puffed, with golden, crisp borders and a perfectly formed hole in the middle to hold the fruit compote he had made. Impressive, I thought, as he presented our meals with the finesse of a five-star establishment. "This whole time, Arthur, you've been avoiding me." There was no fluke in yesterday's omelette. As he sat down at the table with me, he emphasized that our culinary abilities evolved out of pure necessity. Since Clara passed away, I've had to decide whether to finally master the kitchen or accept a life of subpar takeout and sorrow casseroles. We dined in friendly quiet for a while, and the pancake was tasty, airy and slightly custardy in the middle, with the fruit compote offering the ideal tangy contrast to the pancake sweetness. While enjoying a second serving of breakfast, I couldn't help but notice how our children would be taken aback by our casual breakfast conversation. Do you think it disproves their impression of us as demanding and difficult? Perhaps the most important thing they've learned from this is that their parents are complete people, not just aging issues or annoying personality quirks, Arthur said with some thinking. We got back to our sewing job after breakfast and finished the second set of curtains by mid-morning. Despite obviously feeling the strain, Arthur was adamant about hanging them right away. After 15 years of dark damask, my living room was transformed with dazzling blue linen, which somehow made the entire space feel more sophisticated and welcome, replacing the heavy damask. As I took a step back to appreciate our efforts, I said that it felt like the living space could breathe again. Just the effect I was going for, Arthur acknowledged as he gingerly took a seat in an armchair. I thought you said we could have a private recital, right? With a flutter of performance nervousness I hadn't felt in years, I made my way to the piano. What should I play for this individual who had a profound understanding of music but wasn't a performer? After giving it some thought, I started with Schubert's Impromptu in G-flat major. It's tender without being pretentious, easy enough for my creaking fingers to play, and full of feeling. As the music resounded across the room, I stopped thinking of myself as a teacher showing technique and started thinking of myself as a real performer expressing myself via music. Arthur paid close attention as the speaker spoke. Regardless of whether he was staring at my hands or closed his eyes, he was completely absorbed in the sound. After completing the Schubert, I proceeded to play Rafflé's Dawn Low by Debussy, a prelude by Bach, and finally Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major without pausing. A program that I hadn't intentionally planned but which arose from some underlying musical intuition came to fruition as each piece flowed into the next. I was taken aback by how much I had played without getting tired, so I paused after about 40 minutes. For a brief while, Arthur did not speak. As if waiting for the last thoughts to fade away completely before expressing themselves. He merely expressed his gratitude. That was just remarkable. Your kindness is greatly appreciated, I naturally declined. Quite harsh. Right on. There was no wiggle room in his tone. Your sensitivity as a player is very extraordinary. Sure, technical know-how is essential, but true analytical brainpower is much more crucial. Now I get it. You've been a great instructor for a long time. More so than generic, well-meaning praises, the targeted, informed praise struck a chord with me. As far as music is concerned, you are more knowledgeable than you admit. He reminded me that I had been with Clara for 43 years. Lots of practice, shows, and evaluations after each performance. Although I was more of a bystander than an active participant, music served as a unifying medium for us. I took note of the actor who is the most integral aspect of every performance. Music is nothing more than air vibrations without an audience. Our discussion was cut short by a message on my phone. Robert has sent another message. My anxiety is rising once more, Mom. You aren't really engaging. Would you say everything is all right? The care home where Bethany's stepfather resides informed her that he was on leave when she called. What's happening? Arthur was shown the message, and I took note of the growing anxiety. It would appear that their cruise is not going down well with them. Arthur had a glimmer of contentment in his response. However, Bethany's description of my living circumstances worries me. Not a nursing home, but a private retirement community where I can live independently with the choice of some services. While penning my response, I noticed yet another instance of their molding our lives to conform to their storyline. Everything is great, I thought. I have spent the entire morning on the piano, while Arthur has prepared Dutch baby pancakes for breakfast. The living room is now completely different thanks to the finished curtains. See attached images. Contacting Arthur's home is not a concern. His stay will now continue through Tuesday. It's been the most delightful experience. Perhaps we'll go for a drive to the lake this afternoon, given the weather cooperates. I was cautious to show just enough of the change to be obvious without showing the complete scope of our transformation when I posted a photo of our living area after we reorganized and draped it. Is it Tuesday? Arthur glanced over my shoulder and asked. They are expected to return a day later than planned. What I meant was that we've extended our agreement beyond their stipulated timetable since we're so comfortable together. It's just a slight escalation, I stated. His expression was one of true awe. Margaret Walsh, your cunning is just charming. As I responded, a surge of delight washed over me at the thought of receiving such high praise from the genius behind our psychological operation. According to Arthur, who glanced out the window at the beautiful fall day, operations are important. Was the trip to the lake really on the table? The suggestion took me by surprise. I hadn't intended to organize an outing, but I had brought it up to add to our story of pleasant companionship. It has been a long time since I last laid eyes on Lake Champlain, and the weather looks perfect. But when I beheld the warm light filtering through our freshly hung curtains, I found myself unexpectedly enamored with the concept. I went with an impulsive, I would love to, decision. During this season, you should be able to see breathtaking greenery along the shore road. A look of true delight spread across Arthur's face. Excellent. I should probably let you know that I am not the best passenger. My regrettable inclination to offer unsolicited navigational advice, according to Clara. I reassured him, mentally plotting our trip, that I'm sure I've heard worse from 40 years of traveling with my parents as piano teachers. Carry a sweater. During this season, the wind that blows off the lake can be rather strong. I was struck by how effortlessly we had transformed from hesitant roommates to enthusiastic travel companions in the span of 3 days as I collected my personal belongings for our spontaneous journey. Our children's intentions in pairing us up were ill-informed. They had no idea that our apparently conflicting personalities would end up getting along so well. I fumbled for my car keys, yet a smile spread across my face at the prospect. Perhaps the best form of retaliation wouldn't be to cause them concern so much as to demonstrate how completely incorrect they had been regarding us from the start. As far as the eye could see, Lake Champlain was as wide as a silver spoon. Its expansive expanse flawlessly reflects the pristine fall sky. We had taken the picturesque route, meandering through verdant forests bursting with vibrant fall foliage, and Arthur had lived up to his promise of being a watchful passenger. While we were traveling, his commentary tended to focus less on navigational critique and more on landscape appreciation. He would point out faraway mountain peaks, comment on especially magnificent maple trees, and share historical tidbits about the places we went through. As we went by a little bayside settlement, he pointed out that the British had fired on that harbor during the War of 1812, a little conflict that history books had mostly ignored but which local historical groups still remembered and celebrated. At Burlington Bay Park, we were now sitting on a bench by the water, huddled up against the cold wind that would blow across the lake every so often. As white birds zipped in the distance, we enjoyed a bit of tea and some maple cookies that I had baked before the retreat. I had brought a small thermos with me. It had slipped my mind how breathtaking this vista is. According to Arthur, his gaze fixated on the distant Adirondacks rising across the lake. In what may have been the year 1987, Clara and I spent a visiting semester here at Middlebury. We hired a little sailboat, thought we were very seaworthy, and were rescued by a park ranger who was somewhat amused when the wind suddenly calmed down. The picture made me happy. While sailing with his pianist wife, James, a younger Arthur, who was less physically constrained but probably just as opinionated, was scared of water. And I made an offer back. He had the ability to swim, but for some reason, he felt an overwhelming fear of water. We found a happy medium by having our picnics at vantage points like this one, where we could still see the lake's splendor without being too close. A reasonable plan, Arthur agreed. Marriages that thrive necessitate these adjustments. It was easy for James and I to work through our differences, and we managed to create a life that accommodated his need for structure and my sporadic, impetuous creative needs, so I nodded in agreement. Arthur cocked his head slightly to look at me, his face betraying his curiosity. I often wonder whether I've been too accommodating since he passed away. While speaking with Robert, I made sure to clarify things, but I let his worries influence my decisions more than they should have. The progressive loss of independence was his idea of what was normal for someone my age, and I went along with it. Arthur explained that it's almost hard to notice unless you're being controlled instead of asked for advice. That was it, I said, appreciative of his eloquent description of the emotion I had been experiencing but had been unable to put my finger on. The most annoying thing is that I've let it happen. There's no use in being hard on yourself. Arthur made a quiet observation. What really counts is seeing the trend and making the necessary course corrections while you can still plot a new course. His statements were filled with practical insight rather than judgment. I couldn't help but wonder what sort of lecturer he had been, someone who was fair but firm, who pushed his pupils to think more clearly without letting them down when they tried. So, what's the plan? Following a pleasant pause, I inquired. Upon their return, will they find out about our little game? As Arthur watched 2 kayakers paddling along the beach below us, he pondered the question. I believe it's true that we were against being deceived and having decisions made about us without our input. That we opted to convey a point in a somewhat theatrical manner. So what about us? The question popped into my head before I could give it a proper formulation. That we found compatibility that we didn't expect, he responded with caution. Even if it's fabricated, hardship has a way of bringing together people who would never have crossed paths otherwise. What had grown between us during these peculiar, formative days? I named it friendship. Yes, I agree. Unexpectedly, a gift from a completely misguided matching scam warmed his scholarly features, and he grinned. For a few minutes, we sat in peaceful stillness, taking in the scene, the light reflecting off the water, the distant mountains guarding the expansive lake. At some point, I noticed that Arthur was still a little chilly even with his bulky sweater on. I proposed that we keep driving to a little cafe in Charlotte that I knew had great soup and a heated indoor terrace where we could watch the lake. As we cautiously made our way back to my car, Arthur's cane support growing stronger by the moment. I couldn't help but match his stride, even offering my arm to smooth out a particularly bumpy patch of path. It wasn't the overprotective care of an elderly caretaker, rather, it was the genuine concern of a friend for another. I think today is the first day outing since Clara's death that I have not been hyper-aware of my limits, without feeling like a burden or an annoyance to whoever has accompanied me, Arthur said as we got back into the car. My heart sank at that simple statement. The truth is, I honestly don't think anyone would find your company to be a burden. Then your imagination is severely lacking, he said, his tone betraying neither bitterness nor nastiness but rather sardonic self-awareness. I can be stubborn and hard to work with, as Bethany has probably already told you. My lack of patience and flexibility does not make me the best travel companion for trips that need these traits. Maybe your companions have just been too impatient and rigid for your liking. To go to Charlotte Arthur's, I proposed we go back the scenic way. His laughter was unanticipated, but it was real, a sound of utter delight at being startled. It would have been perfect for Clara. He said. As far as she was concerned, I was picking the incorrect measures to measure the dynamics of our relationships. Slang for assuming the worst about people? I playfully teased. That exactly. His confession was free of defensiveness and full of self-deprecating humor, an attitude I've worked hard to overcome for a long time. Just like I recalled, the cafe in Charlotte was a restored Victorian house with a glassed-in veranda that offered panoramic views of the lake. A nice corner table was ours to sit at. I was given a bowl of delicious butternut squash soup and some freshly baked bread. I was then left alone to savor the meal and take in the breathtaking scenery. In the midst of our last bites of dinner, Arthur proposed that we record our journey. I got it right away, and I went to get my phone to snap a photo of the two of us with the lake as a background for our continuing story. Arthur leaned in just a little, his white hair standing out against my silver gray, and we were both sporting real smiles instead of the forced ones for pictures. He declared it to be flawless. Looking over the picture. Include a caption that is appropriately vague and send it. I penned a fresh note to Robert. A fantastic day spent adventuring around the lake with Arthur. His knowledge of the area's past is extensive. At Charlotte Bay Cafe, having soup right now. I don't see the point in checking in so often. Together, we are enjoying ourselves immensely. What a surprising link. Since we are thoroughly enjoying each other's company, we have decided that Arthur will stay until Tuesday. Their peace should be shattered by the unexpected connecting term that keeps popping up. When Arthur paired it with the reference to the prolonged stay, he was pleased. I noticed, without criticizing, that you're taking it all in. He said that he hadn't had such a high level of enjoyment since reenacting Ionesco's The Chairs in a theater basement that actually flooded. The ensuing discoveries from well-managed chaos have a special, gratifying quality. We drifted off into a peaceful hush as we drove home into the waning light. Arthur had a short nap, obviously exhausted from the day's activities, as I confidently made my way through the fading light on routes I'd been on before. It was unexpectedly personal, not in a romantic way, but in the calm confidence that comes from sharing something vulnerable. He didn't see any need to be vigilant or involved for my sake. I didn't feel pressured to keep talking just because he did. We resumed our nightly ritual that we had somehow developed in the span of a few days after we returned home. I lit a little fire in the living room fireplace, which had been disused for months but was now crucial to the end of our evening, whilst Arthur brewed tea. We found a comfortable spot in the rearranged seating area. Thanks to our combined efforts, the room is now illuminated by the pleasant light of the fires. Would you like us to verify their reply? I had purposefully put my phone down since sending our most recent inflammatory message, so Arthur pointed to it. Several alerts, 3 unanswered calls, and a string of Robert's and Bethany's increasingly worried texts were displayed on the screen. I went with the most current one. What on earth is happening, Mom? Strange relationship? Is an extension possible? You are unfamiliar with Arthur. Oh, and Bethany claims he's a real pain at times. Your safety is our top priority. As soon as possible, please give us a call. I noticed Arthur's raised eyebrow at the extremely challenging reference when I showed him the note. As another wave of shame washed over me, I noticed that they are now genuinely worried. Maybe we've gone too far now. Maybe, Arthur admitted. Having said that, I propose we have one last strategic conversation before we calm their nerves. So, what were your intentions? There was that familiar tinge of mischief in his smile. Something to imply, without saying it directly, that our relationship had developed beyond that of friends. Allow them to form their own opinions, which will definitely be wildly inaccurate and theatrical. I gave his recommendation some thought. Even though our little strategy had accomplished its goal, this last twist was indescribably delightful. Thank you very much, Professor Caldwell. So, what's your plan? With impeccable dramatic timing, Arthur dictated. Bob, my darling, there's no cause for alarm. Despite our short time together, Arthur and I have already found that we are really compatible. Some relationships just don't follow the rules of time. We've been talking about possible plans for when you get back. There is really a lot of space here. Once you're back, we'll explain everything. Have a good night's sleep, I wrote out his words and then showed him the outcome. I loved how it was deftly vague, implying possible housing situations without asserting anything concrete. Arthur nodded, acknowledging that the strategic deployment of implications is a forte of both the academic and theatrical worlds. I suddenly understood how much I would miss this, the conspiracies, the shared humor, and the intellectual stimulation of being in Arthur's company, when our children returned and our temporary alliance came to an end as I hit send, initiating our final act. Since Arthur's attitude shifted from his typical sardonic mask to something kinder, my face must have conveyed the recognition. He whispered to Margaret, "These have been the most engaging days I've experienced in years, just in case you were wondering." Quite an unexpected result from an unwelcome imposition was also my reaction. As the first snowfall of the season started, the windows were obscured by the exquisite crystalline messengers of winter. As we gathered inside, the crackling fire provided a pleasant backdrop to our talk. We started a new game of Scrabble, not so much to test each other's skills as to extend the evening, so that we may spend more time together before we go our own ways. A little snowfall on Monday turned my garden into a monochromatic etching and gave me a new perspective on how the world could look in stark black and white, and an endless variety of grayscales. By the time I got there, Arthur had already set up his daily ritual and was making our usual meal in the kitchen. As he brought me my coffee, he noted that it was our last full day of forced togetherness. How can we commemorate this event? I ponder as I take a sip of my coffee. The living room has been redecorated, the curtains are finished, we have played Scrabble, and we have toured the lake. What remains for our made-up story of love? While effortlessly flipping a beautiful omelette, Arthur pondered, maybe something suitably domestic, yet subtly suggesting deeper connection. His countenance was pensive. How about collaborating on a creative project? I did say that I had James's old camera gear stashed away in the attic, the concept solidifying in my mind as I talked. It was clear that photography was his passion. For a long time, I considered putting his collection into order, but I could never get the enthusiasm. To Arthur, it was perfect. Going over past experiences together gives a chance for a real connection and implies closeness without blatantly claiming it. After breakfast, we explored the attic, a room I hadn't given any attention to in years, through a process of shared discovery. It was a spot where I occasionally went to get out seasonal decorations or put things that I didn't plan on using. Arthur skillfully and determinedly navigated the stairs, politely declining my offer of assistance with a stern but courteous, "I may be slow, but I am still capable, thank you." The unexpected neatness of the attic was evidence of James's meticulous character. He had cleared space along the rear wall to set up his photography gear. He had shelves constructed especially for the purpose of storing the many cameras, albums, and boxes of prints. As Arthur watched him examine a high-quality Nikon with expert hands, he realized he was dead serious about this. Even when compared to modern standards, this is top-notch machinery. I took out a box of prints with detailed labels and explained that photography was his chemistry's antidote. Over the week, scientists strive for precision. On weekends, they unleash their creativity through image making. We spread out on the attic floor, supported by vintage quilts that I had plucked from a cedar trunk, and started poring over James's photography archive. I had forgotten about this side of my late hubby until I saw these pictures. He has an exceptional talent for composition, can capture tender moments devoid of sentimentality, and is particularly enthralled by the movement of light and shadow. Arthur claimed, after studying a sequence of monochrome landscapes, that he has true talent. Astounded by the profound impact the acknowledgement had on me, I nodded in agreement. He treated it as seriously as he did his schoolwork, despite the fact that he constantly referred to it as a pastime. I found myself reminiscing about James, our time together, and the adventures captured in his photographs as we went through his decades' worth of photos. Arthur shown real interest rather than merely courteous accommodation by listening carefully and asking thoughtful questions. One of the boxes had photographs that James had taken of me when I was unwittingly doing things like playing the piano, gardening, or reading by the window. One of the most unexpectedly moving things was seeing myself as seen by my husband. The clear affection in his viewpoint. The meticulousness with which he had recorded instances that I had no idea were being recorded. Arthur noted in silence that he clearly saw you as he studied a striking photo of me playing the piano. As if bathed in a natural lighting, my face betrayed my complete immersion in the music. Not merely your physical appearance, but also a fundamental aspect of your personality. With a sudden tightness in my throat, I whispered, "Yes." Yes, he did. With an unusual delicacy, Arthur gently placed the photograph aside. Maybe it's time to take a break. Our psychological warfare effort did not foresee the impact this would have. His thoughtfulness and insight moved me. "Thank you," I murmured quickly. I couldn't help but think of the peculiar closeness that had grown between us in the short span of 4 days as we made our way downstairs for lunch, a basic meal consisting of soup and bread. Despite his unpleasant arrival, this individual had managed to become a trusted confidant. Someone I could confide in about James without worrying about the uncomfortable empathy or impatient tolerance that others would exhibit when we talked about him. "Once again, you're being overly dramatic." Arthur detected a hint of devilment in his tone. I responded that it was only a thought on how fast things may change. "I was terrified of you being here 4 days ago. Now I'm at a loss for words to describe the change, so I pause." He even hinted, with a touch of his dry humor, that I was tolerating him well. While I was enjoying our company, I had to correct you firmly since I was dreading the end of it. More exposed than I had hoped, the confession lingered in the air between us. The typically cynical exterior of Arthur's face began to peel back, revealing a kinder side. He murmured softly that the feeling was mutual. Unexpectedly, these past several days have been pivotal. My phone rang just as I was about to reply. Robert called instead of sending a text message. The circumstance that had brought us together had broken our private moment, yet Arthur and I still exchanged looks. Do I need to respond? Despite knowing that we would have to deal with the fallout of our plan at some point, I still asked. "Sure thing," Arthur nodded, albeit he might have been on speakerphone, so we could all work together for the performance. By turning on the speakerphone, I acknowledged the call. "Good day, Robert." The tone of my son's voice, "Mom," was one of both relief and anxiety. "At last, after days of trying, we have finally reached you." I gently reminded him, "And I've replied to your texts." It has been a very hectic time for Arthur and me. In response, Robert's tone took on an alarming familiarity, and I could tell that was the exact reason we were afraid. The meticulous, excessively patient tone he adopted whenever he believed I was being unreasonable. These are messages on unforeseen relationships and lengthy stays. Your mother would never do this. Seeing Arthur nod his head in agreement across the table, I ventured the suggestion that maybe you don't understand what it's like to be me as well as you believe. Calm down, Mom. You're already talking about his staying longer after only 4 days of knowing this man? In regards to possible agreements? He is difficult to work with, according to Bethany. This delicate characterization of Arthur's ostensibly challenging attitude made him arch his eyebrows. I said, relishing in the purposeful uncertainty, that Arthur and I understood each other completely. In some cases, the most compatible people turn out to be the ones you least expect. Someone else's voice entered the discussion. It would appear that Bethany is listening on a separate extension. We are merely worried, Margaret. One of Arthur's traits is his persuasiveness. Plus, there have been some health concerns with him lately that need to be taken into account. This description caused Arthur's face to turn black. I nodded in response to his motion for me to speak. His voice betrayed the exact language he had learned in his theater training as he spoke to Bethany. I want you to know that you have my utmost gratitude for your care, but you are completely mistaken about my health and my persuasive abilities. As fully fledged adults, Margaret and I can hold our own in social situations and thoroughly enjoy one another's company. Alfred, Robert's hesitant hello broke the awkward silence that followed this proclamation. Your attentiveness was very unexpected. It seems, Arthur said dryly, that you were unaware that 2 reasonably clever people would see right through your little ruse. Once again, there was a noticeable lack of sound. Across the cabin of the cruise liner, I could practically see Robert and Bethany exchanging terrified looks. Scheme? Bethany tried to act innocent. Your meaning is unclear to me. Excuse me, but I believe you are, I interrupted. The easy journey. The plans made at the last minute. The naive belief that merging 2 challenging elderly relatives into one may eliminate our differences, at least in your eyes. Dear mother, that is not. Robert got going. It isn't, I said, taking a page out of my own frank confrontational playbook. Robert, tell the truth. This chance wasn't limited to a cruise. Here, we set out to determine whether Arthur and I may potentially. Excuse me? Unite as friends? Get all you need for senior care in one easy package? More so than any admission, the prolonged quiet validated our assumptions. Last but not least, Bethany made the defensive offer that they felt you may like each other's company. Both of you are well-educated, cultured, and intellectual. Moreover, you're both incredibly self-reliant when it comes to your living arrangements, as Arthur pointed out. Listen, Robert continued, adopting the level head he employed during contentious discussions. Perhaps we could revisit this topic tomorrow, face to face, once everyone has had a chance to think about it. After sharing a quick look with Arthur, I nodded in agreement to his brilliant notion. Regarding our time together, we have a lot to share. Please hold off on making any big decisions until we get back, all right? Even over the phone, Robert's worry was obvious. Minor adjustments and reorganizations. When I responded to Robert, we're quite capable of making our own decisions, I adopted a more forceful tone, which appeared to startle him into a brief period of silence. Tomorrow, though, we eagerly anticipate your arrival. Have a safe trip. After we ended the call, Arthur and I sat in quiet contemplation for a while, the reality of our soon-to-be different lives hitting us like a ton of bricks. Finally, he spoke. We seem to have achieved the exact result we were going for with our little show. It's terrifying to think that their matchmaking may have worked better than they had hoped. To a lesser extent than I had hoped, I did agree. I had been hesitant to admit it before, but our discussion had made it clear that tomorrow would mark the end of this unexpected interlude as well as the return of our children. The next step is what? Arthur gave the question the weight it merited as he deliberated. Everything remains scheduled. We come clean about knowing about their plan, and we set firm limits on how they can influence our future decisions. With that, he abruptly ended the sentence, leaving us hanging as we went our separate ways and ended our little partnership. Surprisingly, I was hesitant to say the inevitable conclusion that we both knew was coming, and then I repeated it. The gentle snowfall had ceased, revealing a world changed, with old forms given a fresh white appearance. Hidden and deeper than what was on the outside, a comparable metamorphosis had taken place within. An essential aspect of my everyday life has been transformed by 4 days of unanticipated company. Spurred latent parts of my personality to life. Our children had created this environment artificially. The question was whether that alteration could or should extend beyond this. Looking at me, Arthur seemed to be going through the same mental processes. Perhaps, he cautiously said, we could talk about what happens next when we're alone. Maybe we ought to. I nodded, understanding that our children's plan and their well-meaning manipulation weren't the ones dictating what happened next. Rather, it was our genuine decision regarding the unforeseen bond that had formed between two ostensibly troublesome individuals. Served as a unit due to external forces. Something major was coming to a close on Tuesday morning, and the realization was disconcerting. Our surprising relationship and 4-day psychological warfare journey had come to a close. This evening, Robert and Bethany would be back. Hopeful for either good news about their matchmaking services or bad news about the clash of two challenging personalities. The truth was much more complex and, possibly, disturbing to their worldview than what they had anticipated. I went downstairs to find Arthur already in the kitchen, but he hadn't followed our usual pattern. He sat at the table, seemingly lost in contemplation, nursing a cup of coffee instead of making breakfast. I wished him a good morning. Caffeinating at home. You seem in deep thought. In response, he smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes as he plotted our last act. The shocking showdown that ensues when our kids come back to discover their plan exposed. As I took my place across from him, I thought, yes, the denouement. However, compared to 4 days earlier, I am now less invested in their misery. Likewise, he conceded. Even our moderate brand of vengeance has lost some of its luster. For a while, we sat in peaceful stillness, mindful of the unfinished business from yesterday, the subject of what happens after the revelation of today and our respective lives come to an end. Arthur meticulously placed down his coffee and proceeded to speak about our conversation from yesterday. Following the return of our children, I have been thinking about what is next. Just like I have, I confessed. Is there anything you've decided upon? He was very careful not to express any opinions on the subject in his tone. I pondered the best way to put into words the tangled feelings that had grown between us during our short time together. After taking it slow at first, I've come to love these days. Working with you has brought a level of excitement and interest to my life that I haven't experienced in a while. Impressive feedback from someone who at first thought I was an annoyance, he remarked with a touch of his dry humor. I firmly asserted that it was the highest. Even more so, I'm hesitant to go back to the isolation I felt before you came. A subtle change occurred in Arthur's expression. Either relief or surprise. That's how I've been thinking, he confessed. The last several days have brought back fond memories of social activities I had forgotten how much I appreciated, such as having a meaningful conversation with someone whose intelligence is complementary to mine, eating with others, and even the little domestic negotiations of personal space. I noticed that we got along well, even though he said we have challenging personalities. Maybe it's because of our differences that we operate so well together. We are two powerful individuals who respect each other's space because it is essential to us. As always, the information was insightful. Rather than causing tension, what could have been an argument had brought us closer together through a paradoxical acknowledgement of our own freedom. What does that mean for us now? I have never been one to engage in much circumlocution, so I asked straight out. How can we best inform Robert and Bethany that they can anticipate their return with conflict or romance in mind? His blue eyes were fixed on Arthur as he leaned in ever so slightly. The reality, in my opinion, is that we formed an unanticipated bond of friendship, that we like being in each other's company, and that we might want to keep in touch, but under our own conditions rather than theirs. The term friendship seemed appropriate, but it didn't quite capture the depth of our relationship, so I repeated it. I get what you mean. With the possibility of more, he delicately added, if that's something you would contemplate, in due time, without expectation or pressure. It was so characteristically Arthurian of the qualification, precise enough to allow for a dignified retreat if needed, but also forthright in its declaration of potential. His distinctive approach made me smile. I admitted that I might think about it. In the end, his response smile was warm and genuine, unprompted by expectations or pressure. After that, I think we get each other. I nodded my head in agreement, sensing a calm harmony blossoming between us. I truly believe we do. Preparations for our children's return consumed the rest of the day. After we finished redecorating, Arthur insisted on assisting me with a welcome home dinner, even though I told him he was only a guest, and we finished up the project. As he skillfully chopped veggies for a salad, he pointed out that he was no longer just a guest. Certainly a friend. Maybe someone who was involved in the plot as well. Maybe even a companion. I gave into all of the above and let him handle making the salad while I concentrated on the entree. I felt an unforeseen increase in my anxiety as the day drew to a close. We had to face the reality of Arthur's leaving in addition to our children's reactions to our admission because they were coming back so soon. Practical questions were still unresolved, even though we discussed potential future outcomes. Whether or not our bond could endure beyond the intensity of these 4 days apart, and how frequently we could see each other. Arthur made an announcement from his theatrically placed spot near the front window, shouting out that they had arrived. A pair of vehicles. They probably didn't take the same route from the airport. I sat down next to him at the window and watched as Robert's car and Bethany's SUV pulled into my driveway. They came walking up to my front door, looking weary from travel yet attentive, their faces betraying a mix of worry and intrigue. All set? Hey, Arthur, he whispered. As I will always be, I responded, raising my shoulders. I hurried to answer the door when it rang. Arthur took up residence in the living room, the perfect spot to survey our newly redecorated space. Dear Mom. As soon as I opened the door, Robert greeted me with an exclamation that was more passionate than our typical hellos. It's all right. I accepted his embrace and responded, of course, I'm okay. I noticed Bethany nervously following behind him. So what if I weren't? As Robert made his way into the foyer, Bethany explained that these were your messages. So enigmatic were they. Finally, there was the one concerning possible agreements. As she beheld the living room's makeover, new curtains, repositioned furniture, and Arthur sitting in James's chair, looking at them with serene amusement, her words died off. She carefully greeted him, Arthur. You're still here, as expected, he said dryly, but maybe not in the shape you were hoping to see me in. I don't understand. Robert looked suspiciously between us as he asked. Plus, where is the living room now? I gave a simple explanation. We redecorated. The space required some renovation, and Arthur possesses remarkable taste in interior design. As if solving a difficult calculation, Robert repeated slowly that you redecorated jointly. The fire brigade, too? Those insurance claim adjusters? Our children saw the silent connection between Arthur and me as we exchanged glances. My suggestion was that we take a seat, and I pointed to the rearranged chairs. We have a lot of ground to cover. After they were both comfortable, Robert and Bethany sat nervously on the couch. Arthur and I sat in matching armchairs across from them as I started to explain everything that I had thought about. First, I calmly said that there was no fire, emergency, or crisis of any type. Those citations were meant to deceive. But Robert started to ask why. For the simple reason that we quite soon established the true motivation behind your convenient cruise and my similarly convenient placement here, Arthur intervened with relative ease. Bethany's face turned red. Your implication is unclear to me. Yes, I believe you do. I delicately retaliated. The last-minute booking, the trip that became available out of nowhere, and the wish that merging two ostensibly troublesome old relatives would alleviate your apparent issue with our respective living arrangements on our own. Robert displayed the poise to appear ashamed. Mom, that's not how it happened. It was merely Arthur's suggestion that we could get along. Create a bond that would facilitate your daily routines? Maybe even think about living with someone else, combining two issues related to elder care into one convenient option. The awkward quiet they maintained validated our opinion. So, I went on to explain what had really transpired. Your plan was exposed for what it really was the moment we heard it. When we first started to feel like we were being controlled and that decisions were being made for us without our input, it was really frustrating. When Arthur continued, to give you a taste of your own medicine, to create sufficient anxiety and uncertainty that you might reconsider such high-handed tactics in the future, Robert's expression changed to one of insight. Arthur verified that the whole thing was a performance, including the cryptic texts, the mentions of fires and insurance, and the unexpected connection. Created with the express purpose of disturbing you, just as your arrogant plans had disturbed us. Oh my goodness, Bethany appeared speechless. I imply that it is immature. Maybe, but it seems to work. As if to convey the impact of having your life dictated to you by others, Robert drew closer, his face changing from shame to true remorse. I agree with you. Instead of assuming, we need to have inquired. Mom, I apologize. Arthur as well. I am sorry that I have placed you in this predicament. With Arthur nodding in agreement at my side, I stated that we accepted the apology. Another thing, though, is that you need to be aware of. You mean what I'm saying? Cunningly, Bethany inquired. Arthur nodded slightly in my direction, as I looked across at him. Your plan may have been poorly executed, but its principle wasn't totally wrong. Well, it turns out that Arthur and I really do like spending time together. Do you possess it? The astonishment was evident in Robert's voice. Yes, Arthur verified it. In addition to being an outstanding pianist and a fierce Scrabble opponent, your mother has a cunning streak that goes well with my own theatrical tendencies. I went on to say that Arthur has shown to be unexpectedly domestically competent, insightful, and intellectually engaged. We've developed a bond that we cherish and plan to keep going strong. Robert paused each time he said the word friendship, as if looking for deeper connotations in it. Arthur has verified that it is a friendship. Is it worth it for us to investigate the prospect of further development? As we see fit, when we want to, and free from interference from others. We were hoping for the precise effect that the carefully written sentence would have. It rendered our children momentarily speechless. So you're not, Bethany motioned nebulously, as if she couldn't put into words the romantic situation they'd hoped for or feared. I made it clear that we are two adults who have found that our hobbies and personality are a good fit. There is currently no concrete information beyond the possibility that they may decide to spend more time together down the road. I understand, Robert responded, while his face betrayed his ongoing mental processing. Speaking of housing, did you bring it up in your message? It was an intentional provocation, Arthur conceded. I added that while we have talked about the prospect of future visits, weekend stays, and maybe even longer sojourns, we are not planning on living together or making any big life adjustments just yet. As we move at our own pace and make our own judgments based on what feels right for us, Robert's concern is still visible on his face. Arthur pointed out that this is exactly how it should be. This life, we get to decide. Although your backing is appreciated, it is neither necessary nor wanted by your management. Without being overly severe, the lesson was communicated clearly. As they grew older, I saw the knowledge sink in on our kids' faces. Their parents were still capable people with the right to make their own decisions. After much deliberation, Robert ultimately admitted that we were right to learn our lesson. You did, and I consented without animosity. I think we should put aside our grudges and have a late Thanksgiving dinner together now that the food is ready. Much is for which to be grateful, in the end. Upon entering the dining room, I glanced across at Arthur, who was seated at the head of the table. Our eyes met in a quiet expression of mutual triumph and true love. Our own timetable, based on our own well-considered decisions, would determine the course of events. Our bond, however created in the most unforeseen of circumstances, had already altered a crucial aspect of our lives. Our offspring thought that pairing up two troublemakers would be the perfect solution to a problem. On the contrary, they had unintentionally produced something that neither of us could have foreseen. An alliance formed out of mutual outrage that had grown into something far more substantial, a true convergence of like-minded individuals. As I served the dinner that Arthur and I had cooked together, I realized that their ill-advised plan had been worth it. It seems that sometimes the bad things may happen for the right causes. Arthur raised his glass in a toast that held layers of personal significance between us, proposing that we raise it to unexpected connections. I completed the sentiment by adding that we should each make our own decisions. In unison, our glasses clinked, signaling the start of a new chapter that we would write ourselves, according to our own standards and in our own time. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe for more emotional journeys with Mom Echo.